Hi, I'm Nick Termini with the Business Spotlight brought to you by Action Coach in North Kansas City. Today we're on with Elizabeth from Novella Brandhouse. Hello, Elizabeth.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Yeah, absolutely. So the goal of the Business Spotlight is to promote local business and help share your story to other entrepreneurs in our network. Elizabeth, could you please tell us about Novella Brandhouse and how you got it started?
Yeah. So, um, so I am the CEO, founder of the company, and director of brand strategy. And Novella Brandhouse is a branding-focused, full-service ad agency. We're based in Kansas City, Missouri, in the heart of the crossroads, but we have clients nationwide. And typically, we are servicing clients they're scaling companies, they're established companies, but their brand is not caught up with where they are. So they probably haven't, up leveled their brand, and their company has kind of changed a little. It's evolved, it's scaling, it's growing, and maybe they've acquired new services or new product lines. They acquired another company and they've kind of added that into their service offering, or they're just really growing and they're kind of like at that next level. They're maybe servicing, their ideal client has changed a little bit. And what we typically find is that when they're so busy doing all of that, they neglect the brand part of it. So whether that's, up leveling and really making more professional the visual brand piece of it, but more often than not, we really see that it's in the brand messaging, just kind of the overall strategy for their brand. Like that has not caught up to where they are, and so it makes it really hard for them to market effectively and compete effectively, kind of in their competitive set.
That's awesome. So Elizabeth, could you give us an example of how you help these clients, catch up to what their growth pattern is? That's awesome stuff.
Yeah, so I actually started this company. Well, Novella is actually we're celebrating our 10-year anniversary this year. But I really started kind of the precursor to the company 17 years ago. And so when I very first started, I was working with really small companies, really small clients like solopreneurs, startups. And I had well, before that, I'd worked two different stints at large ad agencies. And this is back before high-speed internet. It was just a different time. And so the model was a traditional ad agency. And so for a lot of companies, that really didn't work. And so I saw back in the early 2000s that there was an opportunity for an ad agency to be created that could serve, smaller companies, right? And so I took that idea, I started it 17 years ago, and then a company evolves. And I'm telling this part of the story, one, because it's just part of how Novella started and kind of to where we are now. But I really understood what it is, what it means from a company perspective and a brand perspective. From being a company ourselves that was a startup, this scrappy, total bootstrapped company, to a company that is scaling. I mean, it's a whole different ballpark of of issues and challenges, and the brand and marketing is no different in those, right? I mean, there's different HR challenges and operations and accounting, sales challenges when a company is growing and it's scaling. And the same again goes for branding and marketing. So I understood that from a business perspective, but I also understood it from a branding perspective. I went through two different programs. One is Scale Up. It's run by the Kauffman Foundation here in Kansas City. And I went through that in 2015. And that was life-changing for us. And that really introduced me to the whole idea of, again, really what it means to be a scaling company. And then I went through a couple of years ago, I was part of the national cohort for the Goldman Sachs 10,000 Small Business Program. And again, just kind of and they take a little bit different, approach to teaching companies how to scale. But it was sort of through all of that we realized that our ideal client and the people that we work best with and that we can really serve well are companies that are scaling. So that's kind of how we ended up where we are, and a little bit of, who our ideal client is and really kind of how we help them.
Yeah, so we work with a lot of scaling companies as well. And what get, like you mentioned, a startup, what helps them get going is the business owner's grit and drive to get the company going, doing all the different jobs. And then
Right.
as they grow, the challenges change because their role changes, where they have to grow into more of a leader and less of a practitioner. I'm sure that's something that you guys see, and like you just mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So one of our clients is the Big Biscuit,
Yeah,
and they're
that's awesome.
you've probably been to the Big Biscuit. They're,
Absolutely, many
oh, it's
times.
so good. It's so
Yes.
good. I never mind going and doing a little competitive research when it comes to breakfast places or going to
Yes.
the Big Biscuit, obviously. So what's really interesting about them, and anybody can read about this on our website. We show the work there and a little bit of the case study of this, but they're this growing company. They're a growing, they're franchising, and they obviously have a brand. People know the Big Biscuit, they know what the experience is, but when they went to then sell franchises and add franchisees, they part of a process is your branding and marketing. And so we worked with them to really put parameters around a brand that they have, but they needed to put it into a process. They needed to create a solid style guide. They needed to create brand messaging that then their franchisees could take and implement, right? Because they want all their franchisees looking the same, talking the same, speaking the same language and brand story, that the company stores are. So that's a little bit of an example of, how a company that is, they're actively scaling, they have a good brand. So their issue wasn't really like, oh gosh, our brand doesn't reflect who we are as a company.
Yeah.
But as they went forward, as they grew, they're like, we want to make sure that we have parameters around this brand, that we create a really good strategy so that it can be implemented over and over again by new people that come into the company.
That's awesome. I love this stuff. And I mean, everything you're saying resonates, and that's who we work with as well. Could you walk us through what your path in growing Novella Brandhouse has been as an owner and growing as a leader?
Yeah. So as I said, I started out and I was one person, and then I grew to a small team of 2 to 3 people. What is interesting is before Novella Brandhouse, the company was called L Marketing, and that's really the company that started. That's what I started 17 years ago. And it started as a virtual ad agency. And at the time, this was like early 2006. So as I mentioned earlier, high-speed internet had come along and really kind of enabled this. And I always say I created one of the first virtual ad agencies. I don't know if it was like the very first one, but I do know that when I was doing Google searches in 2005, 2006, there was nothing like it. At the time I was living in Chicago, which is, of course, advertising agency Mecca, and nobody had heard of the idea. People told me it was a dumb idea. People told me it wouldn't work. But I knew that it was possible. And I really knew that maybe it wouldn't work for the types of companies that were using traditional ad agencies then. But there were a whole group of companies, a whole group of businesses that needed really an ad agency, specifically a branding agency. They needed brand strategy, which is what my expertise is. That they weren't able to get that anywhere. So I created this virtual ad agency, and because I'd worked at 2 large ad agencies, I had this whole like stable of amazing, talented people that had, probably gone out on their own. They were now freelancers or something like that. So I cherry picked them, and we had this stable, this group that I called in for different things, and we really functioned like that for several years. And then about the time that I joined my former business partner, we became Novella Brandhouse. We were just growing. We had more and more clients, and so we really needed to move back to kind of that more brick and mortar type of agency. But what was interesting was we had all the lessons that we had learned as a virtual agency and sort of how to work that way and being much more nimble and efficient. So we kept that efficiency, but we're brick and mortar, and that's kind of where we are now. So about 10 years ago, we were a team of 3, and now we're a team of 12. So in that 10 years.
Yes. So while you're working with scaling companies, you're a scaling company yourself.
Right. Right.
Yes, that's awesome. So when you look throughout your career, right, like there's certain people that help you challenge to want more and to want to grow. Could you talk a little bit about somebody or, a couple experiences? And you mentioned some of the different programs you were able to be a part of, but really narrowing it down to one or two people that have helped you develop where you want to go with your career and opened your eyes to think and dream bigger.
Yeah, well, I first have to give props to Michelle Emerson. She was one of my first supervisors at Valentine Radford. And for any of our friends here in Kansas City, especially old ad agency people or just people that have been around Kansas City for a while, they know Valentine Radford. It's no longer a company, but for a long time, it was one of the top agencies in Kansas City. And so I worked for her there, and she was the one that plucked me out of the media department and into account service. And at the time, we were working on the Sprint account. And that is really where I learned brand strategy. 1997 is where it all started. So I literally owe I owe my whole career and company, and I feel like everything to her. When I tell her that, she gets very embarrassed, but it's true. She changed my life. Then I also had an amazing creative director, Dave Rhagar. He was my creative director at the second agency I worked at. And I really learned creative and how to sell creative, which when you're an agency owner is very important. And just how to work with clients, but just from a whole different perspective. And then from a business perspective, two people. One is my dad. He has been an entrepreneur several times. And so, it's just I just kind of grew up with this entrepreneurial spirit.
Yeah.
So I think there's that. And then Jill Hathaway. So she actually was my business coach at Scale Up. And she had been a client of mine even before that, but she was the one that kept nudging me that I needed to get into Scale Up. And as I mentioned earlier, honestly, that program literally changed my business life and changed the course of my business. So I owe a huge debt to her. And Scale Up has me come back and I speak usually a couple times a year to their ongoing cohorts. And I do that because I really owe a lot to that program.
That's awesome. I mean, and with having a business coaching firm in North Kansas City, I get excited to hear about that because it does take someone to challenge and pull more out of aspiring entrepreneurs that want to grow and get to where they want to go instead of, it's easy to get stuck, and being an entrepreneur and business owner can be a lonely spot at times. Have you ever experienced scenarios of challenge where you had to work through it to continue to grow to the next level?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's definitely highs and lows when you own a business, right? And so, I mean, one being the pandemic, obviously, that was a very tough time. As I mentioned earlier, I had a business partner, and she decided to leave the business, and so that was a hard transition too. Just because you're going from two person ownership to one. And just, it's a transition. So that was definitely hard and a lot of learning there. And I would say when you go from being a startup to really a scaling company, so, for probably most companies, that's going to be sometime around years 3 to 5, like somewhere in there. What I find really interesting is that if you're starting a business, there are tons of resources out there, tons of things. But when you really move to that next level of a scaling company, there's really not a lot. And you sort of don't even know what you don't know. And it hits at different times. Again, I've been in two different scaling type of, cohorts. And some people, they've got the HR down, they've got the operations down, like certain aspects of their business. It's like, done. But then there are other aspects of it that they're really struggling, and they're kind of like at zero when it comes to that. So everybody's at a different level. It just makes it challenging when you get to that kind of part of your business.
You're exactly right. And so, with Action Coach, we've been around for 30 years, and having all these resources to help entrepreneurs get through those spots where they get stuck, because like you said, it's easy when you're really good at certain aspects of the business, but to be able to have speed to value, to not get stuck in those areas is where we've really helped businesses grow. And it sounds like you have as well, in a lot of different areas. And I mean, that's where the growth is, right? Like the juice is in the journey, and being able to see others grow with you and together is a lot of fun.
Yeah, I mean, you're going to make tons of mistakes, but the key
Yes.
is not making the same one twice and learning from all of that. And I think what's been helpful, when I've worked with a business coach over the years, it's like it's that person is that outside perspective, and they can kind of say, hey, they can either warn you you're heading you're heading towards disaster,
Yes.
or they
Yes.
can kind of help you detour around something, and just maybe bring some resources to the table you hadn't thought of. So it honestly is really key. And there's different kinds, obviously, of business coaches that you can, use in different aspects of your business. But it's if
Yes.
you can't, no business owner, and not even if it's like, you're the only owner of the company, right? And sometimes
Yeah.
people say, oh, that's kind of lonely. But even if there are a couple different owners, there's always some aspect of the business that nobody has any experience in. And so
Yeah.
having a coach in that area is really helpful.
I love everything you're saying, Elizabeth. So if you were to look out to the Kansas City business and entrepreneurial community, what are some things that you would offer up as words of encouragement for them as they grow and scale their companies?
Yeah, I think that, so having been in the business world a while and an entrepreneur for a while, I get different people reaching out to me, just like, hey, can we have coffee? I'm starting this business, or I'm looking to do this with it. What are your insights? And I always really try to make myself available, because there were so many people that did that for me, over the years. But the one thing that I say, and I feel like this is true, if you're just, if you've got your business plan and you're getting ready to start your business, or you've been in a business a few years, processes. Process
Yes.
is everything. And especially as you're scaling, you're gonna need to do that. I mean, there was a time where, every new person that joined, I mean, I was almost kind of personally training them. Well, obviously that doesn't, I mean, after a while, and it doesn't really take very long for that to not even be feasible anymore. So you have to have processes in place so that, you can say, here's how we do this. Everything from sort of your key services that you do,
Yes.
right? Like that kind of thing, your signature offer, all the way to how do we do payroll? I mean, you have to
Yeah.
literally make a process for every single thing in your business. And so I feel like that's honestly my number one, because it goes for if you're getting ready to start a business, you are a startup, or you're a scaling company.
Yeah, and I mean, systemize the routine, right? Use
Yeah.
technology where we can. And there's so many business owners out there that you ask a question, hey, what's your procedure for this? What's your plan for that? And they have it in their head, but it doesn't
Right.
exist if it's in their head. They
Right.
need to have it so it's transferable to their team as they grow. So yes, I'm with you 100%. And it's been great having you on. And thank you so much for joining the Business Spotlight.
Yeah, you're welcome. Thanks for having me. This is a great podcast.
Awesome. Thank you.